Supreme Court shakeup. How the Democrats' new plan would give them a majority of justices. Born Alive bill. Republican lawmakers seek more pro-life protections. Russia sanctions. Why the Biden administration is kicking some diplomats out of the country. And Notre Dame Cathedral. Get an update on the restoration 2 years after a devastating fire. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, April 15th, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. A handful of Democratic lawmakers in the House and the Senate want to bring forward a measure to add 4 justices to the Supreme Court. The proposal faces an uncertain future.
We are here today because the United States Supreme Court is broken. It is out of balance, and it needs to be fixed. Too many Americans view our highest court in the land as a partisan political institution.
Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts supports the measure, along with Representative Jerry Nadler from New York. But Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi says there is no timetable to vote on adding Supreme Court justices, also referred to as court packing. Joining us now to talk more about this is John Malcolm, Vice President of the Institute for Constitutional Government at the Heritage Foundation. John, welcome back. Always good to see you. We have a lot to get to, but first, I'd like to get your reaction to the Judiciary Act of 2021, that 2-page bill proposed by some Democratic lawmakers to add more justices to the bench. What do you think?
Oh, it's a terrible idea. I mean, the entire notion of packing the Supreme Court is a blatant attempt for the 2 political branches of government to exert influence on the one branch of our government that is supposed to be independent of politics. Then Senator Joe Biden several years ago referred to this as a bonehead idea, and I sure wish President Biden would listen to Senator Biden. He's just appointed a commission. It's supposedly a bipartisan commission. There are 36 members. You could count on one hand the number of conservatives on that commission to study this issue. But the progressive base of the Democratic Party won't. They're not content to wait 6 months for a report to issue from that commission, which is why these 3 Democratic congressmen and Senator Markey from Massachusetts have proposed this bill.
John, what's the danger of expanding the Supreme Court, and how would it impact this country? And also, is this something that's even constitutional?
Well, it is constitutional. The number of Supreme Court justices is not set in stone in the Constitution. However, with the exception of 5 years in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, the number has been at 9 since 1837. Shortly before she passed away, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that 9 was a good number and that any attempt to pack the court was a very, very bad idea, that it would erode confidence in the court. And Justice Stephen Breyer said very much the same thing last week in a speech at Harvard Law School. I mean, this is all being done for one reason and one reason only, and that was because Donald Trump got to appoint 3 justices to the Supreme Court. So it is not an accident that this piece of legislation would add 4 justices, one more than Donald Trump had, which would then create a 7-6 majority for democratically appointed justices. But it's a horrible idea. Franklin Delano Roosevelt attempted to do this in the 1930s when the Supreme Court was striking down parts of his New Deal legislation. And even though the Democrats overwhelmingly controlled both houses of Congress at the time, they categorically packed the court because they recognized for what it was, which was a blatant political attempt to influence the court.
John, I'm wondering, ultimately, what do you think is going to happen here? How do you see this all playing out?
It's hard to say how it will all play out. There's a lot of pressure from the left on the Democratic Party. In order for this actually to pass, not only would you have to have the votes in the House, and you have to get all 50 Democrats to agree that court packing was a good idea, but then you would have to get them to agree to eliminate the legislative filibuster. But these are strange times. There's a lot of pressure on the Democrats to act, so it is not outside the realm of the possible, but it would be a horrible thing.
Okay, John, thank you so much for your time. Unfortunately, we have to leave it right there. John Malcolm, Vice President of the Institute for Constitutional Government at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much.
Good to be with you.
While a bill aimed at saving the lives of newborn babies who survive an abortion may soon be decided by a vote on the House floor, pro-life lawmakers and organizations are hoping H.R. 619, the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, will get the votes needed to be heard. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales explains.
Freshman Congresswoman Kat Cammack filed the discharge petition to bring the Born Alive Survivors Protection Act to the House floor. A discharge petition allows the minority party, in this case the Republicans, to get a bill heard and voted on the floor without going to any committees. But 218 lawmakers have to sign the petition to make that happen.
The record for a single-day discharge petition was 191 signatures, and yesterday we received 202, so we broke the House record for the most number of signatures, and I couldn't think of a better issue than this one.
Representative Kat Cammack says this bill is personal. When her mother was pregnant with her, she was advised by doctors to have an abortion due to medical issues.
Against all odds, against the doctors telling her to abort me and her own family telling her to abort me, she chose life.
H.R. 619 insists that emergency life-saving care, including transfer to a hospital, be initiated immediately after a baby is born. Abortion facilities who fail to provide this care would be penalized. Catholic lawmakers Majority Whip Steve Scalise and Congresswoman Ann Wagner co-sponsored the bill last year.
My commitment to the unborn, this is a duty that I have and one that I'm going to see through. I am going to make sure that the Born Alive bill is not just passed, but is signed into law.
Pro-abortion advocates say this bill is unnecessary because, according to them, babies do not survive abortions. But the truth is, it happens.
The CDC has reported that over a period of about 10 years that they have reports of at least 143 babies that survived a failed abortion.
But because there isn't a law requiring states to report failed abortions to the CDC, the number is believed to be much greater.
This is indeed an issue, and that these little ones deserve no less protection than any other American citizen.
Lawmakers are now reaching across the aisle to get the dozen or so signatures needed to bring it to the House floor. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
Are concerned about proposed Planned Parenthood funding in the president's 2022 budget. Virginia Congressman Ben Cline asked Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra today whether Roe v. Wade is settled law.
I have no question that Roe v. Wade is an important legal precedent that we must abide by and make sure that women have access to the health care that they need and that they get to make the decisions on that health care.
The reason I ask is because the Hyde Amendment was passed only 3 years later. So that should be considered settled law as well.
Pro-lifers worry that budget funding for Planned Parenthood could be diverted to finance abortion. While the White House hits back against Russia, it is booting out 10 diplomats in response to the SolarWinds breach when U.S. government agencies were hacked. And tonight, Russia warns of retaliation. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, along with diplomats sent packing, dozens of companies targeted as well, not just for the SolarWinds hack, but for election interference too. Now it's wait and see what the Kremlin does.
In the Oval Office, President Joe Biden meets with members of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus.
So anyway, I'm looking forward to our discussion with the caucus.
Just hours earlier, the White House announced an executive order warning that the actions Russia has been engaged in constitute an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States.
President Biden and President Putin had a phone call in which they were direct with one another. They understood one another. President Biden made no bones about the fact that we will be taking actions this week.
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan also says President Biden wants stability with Russia, with the goal of avoiding a cycle of confrontation. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the objective is not to escalate.
We can't predict what the impact will be, but we still believe that when there's unacceptable behavior, we should put consequences in place.
Today, the Russian Foreign Ministry countered,
Joe Biden
saying answers to sanctions will be inescapable and Washington will pay for the degradation of bilateral relations. Still, at least 9 American agencies and private sector companies were hacked, and Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned in a tweet, "We will continue to hold Russia to account for its adversarial actions." One thing both countries have agreed to is extending the last remaining nuclear arms control New START treaty. Earlier this year, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops wrote, extending the New START is essential to maintaining limits on the most dangerous nuclear weapons, and it urged the administration to make negotiations for nuclear disarmament a top priority.
Also tonight, the U.S. will make it harder for Russia to borrow money, and other punitive measures will be taken as well, but not publicly revealed. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
In an East Baghdad marketplace, a car bombing killed 1 person and injured 12. Also, an earlier drone strike caused damage near Erbil Airport, and in northern Iraq, rockets targeted a military base, killing 1 Turkish soldier. There were no claims of responsibility for the 3 attacks. Iranian-backed militias are commonly suspected. The U.S. and Iran appear further apart over the 2015 International Nuclear Agreement. Secretary of State Antony Blinken cites Iran's latest gauntlet to enrich uranium to a level 12 times more than treaty limits.
I have to tell you, the step calls into question Iran's seriousness with regard to the nuclear talks, just as it underscores the imperative of returning to mutual compliance with the JCPOA.
Iran's leader has already dismissed the talks in Vienna as worthless. He reasserts Iran's goal to attain weapons-grade uranium. Europe has now surpassed 1 million deaths from COVID-19. A top official from the World Health Organization calls the situation serious. Nearly 1.6 million new cases are reported weekly in the region. The U.S., Brazil, and Mexico have more than 1.1 million pandemic deaths. The estimated global death toll is 3 million people. Coming up, Committee Against Racism. How the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is responding to recent cases. And selfless service. What's happening to the remains of a priest considered for sainthood. After 2 days of testimony, the defense has rested at the trial of Derek Chauvin in the death of George Floyd. The former Minneapolis police officer is charged with murder and manslaughter. He did not take the stand, invoking the Fifth Amendment. The trial has now adjourned. Closing arguments are set for Monday. Also in Minnesota, there was a 4th night of protest last night following the shooting death of Daunte Wright by a police officer. Several demonstrators were arrested after clashing with police officers. Kim Potter, a former police officer, has been charged with second-degree manslaughter. The 26-year veteran was in court for a preliminary hearing earlier today. Joining us now is Danielle Brown, Associate Director for the Ad Hoc Committee Against Racism at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Danielle, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it. It is definitely a very emotional, intense time right now, as we've been seeing. What would you say is the Catholic response to the situations in Minnesota, the shooting of Daunte Wright, the death of George Floyd, and the fallout, if you will, in those communities and other parts of the country?
Sure. So, I mean, first off, as Christians, we know that we are called to enter into the sadness of the moment with our brothers and sisters and shoulder the burden, just as Simon was called to carry the cross alongside of Jesus. And so there's really a profound moment here where we can be the Simon to the people, particularly in these communities of color that are experiencing exceedingly, I would say, unique and profound sorrow at this moment.
Yeah, and Danielle, can you talk to us about the sort of work that the USCCB Committee Against Racism is doing right now?
Sure. So, we were established in 2017, and in 2018 is really when we sort of got off to the races with the passing of the pastoral letter, Open Wide Our Hearts, which is a document that the bishops started putting together around 2015 when racial issues really started to crop up in the social consciousness and the media. And so, particularly since the death of George Floyd, our committee has been flush with work doing crisis response, communication and policy strategy, direct coaching and training with diocesan staff, diocesan racial justice committees, with Catholic schools, whether it be administrators, faculty, and staff, Catholic apostolates, both large and small. We've been coaching affinity groups as well as counseling state Catholic conferences. So there's all of that alongside of the policy work and the consultation that we are doing alongside of the Office of Government Relations for the U.S. Catholic bishops, in addition to providing all sorts of prayer resources and other documents that ordinary lay folks can go to our website and check out and work through, documents for students to work through. So the work has been very, very expansive. And this is not even touching on the work that we're doing with Catholic publishers at the moment.
Danielle, can you talk to us about how faith leaders are responding to both the deaths and also the protests and violence surrounding those deaths? That is,
Sure.
What's been their message?
Sure. I mean, the message has been really direct. Just today, Archbishop Gomez, the president of the conference out of LA, gave an address to the Minnesota Catholic Conference virtually in a talk called The Catholic Difference on Social Justice. And I would really commend your watchers and your listeners to go and read the entire statement. But Archbishop Gomez calls to mind that we as Catholics have a vital contribution to make in promoting social justice to help shape the direction of American society, which is, he says, only possible essentially with uncensored participation in the public square. So for the Catholic Church and its lay people and its hierarchy even to be able to speak freely and openly about the precepts of the Catholic Church and why our faith and our practice of the faith is so important. But also, secondly, Archbishop Gomez echoes Pope Francis and his concerns that words like freedom and justice and unity are now being bent and shaped to serve as tools for domination, as meaningless tags that can be used to justify any action. This is what Pope Francis has said, and further, Archbishop Gomez has observed that the Pope has warned us against the temptation to reductive anthropological visions of life, of these secular visions that diminish the dignity of the human person. And it's very unfortunate that we see such reductive visions, Archbishop Gomez recognizes, in critical theories and ideologies that are gaining ground in our public life. So we have to reject these secular visions of the human person, how we're supposed to relate to each other, and really reclaim Christ as our Lord and Savior and our identities in Christ. So these are the messages that Catholics really need to understand and sink deep into, recognizing that it is really our identities as sons and daughters of Christ and fully understanding what it means to be a missionary disciple that will give us our individual missions as Christians.
Well, Danielle, thank you so much for coming on today. We really appreciate your time. Danielle Brown, Associate Director for the USCCB Ad Hoc Committee Against Racism. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Up next, 2-year anniversary. Notre Dame Cathedral undergoes a massive restoration after an intense fire. French President Emmanuel Macron visited Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris today, 2 years after that devastating fire.
Là où nous en étions il y a 2 ans, l'émotion qui était la nôtre est une émotion.
President Macron spoke with construction workers about the rebuilding process of France's historic Catholic Cathedral. He encouraged the workers to stay on target in hopes to reopen in 3 years. EWTN News Rome correspondent Colin Flynn joins us now with more. Colin, great to see you. Remind us what happened 2 years ago and what happened in the aftermath.
Good evening, Tracy. Yes, well, the people in Paris and around the world, they looked on in horror as the almost 900-year-old Notre Dame Cathedral went up in flames. And after firefighters tackled the blaze for over 15 hours and a subsequent investigation, the cause of the fire was never fully discovered, but it is believed that it was accidental, likely caused by an electrical short circuit or a discarded cigarette. Now, according to Vatican News, Bishop Eric Amonier, the representative of the Diocese of Paris for the follow-up of the restoration work of the cathedral, he says that the people of Paris are closely following the reconstruction work and are eager for the reopening of the cathedral once again. And at the time of the fire, Pope Francis here at the Vatican, he said that he was praying for all those who were striving to cope with this tragic situation.
And how is the restoration work coming along?
Well, Tracy, it's been a long and difficult process so far, and actually the first 2 years have been really spent evaluating, cleaning and making sure the remaining structure is as secure as possible. The real restoration work they expect to start this winter. Now, the fire was so hot that metal scaffolding, which was inside the church at the time of the fire, it melted into parts of the building. Last year, 200 tons of that scaffolding was removed, and thankfully the stained glass rose windows, the rectangular towers and the priceless Christian relics, they all survived the blaze. And so now the focus is on the task of rebuilding the roof, the spire and parts of the stone vaulting that fell through to the main sanctuary. The money raised so far for the entire restoration is in the region of €833 million.
Wow. And Colin, before I let you go quickly, did the French president have or give an idea, that is, of a completion date for the restoration?
Well, Tracy, soon after the fire, President Emmanuel Macron, he announced that the restoration work would be completed by 2024, but there have been major setbacks and delays, the biggest, of course, being the COVID pandemic. But also, workers found that the cathedral's roof, when that burnt, it spread a lot of toxic lead around the site, and this has further complicated the cleanup. However, they are pledging that Notre Dame Cathedral will at least be open for prayer and worship in time for the Paris Olympic Games, which are taking place in 2024. But some estimate that the full restoration work could take 15 to 20 years. And speaking to reporters today, the French president, he did not shed any light on an expected completion date, but instead he recognized the 9,000 pages of construction plans, the craftsmanship and expertise that have gone into the project, saying an immense job had been completed so far. Tracy?
Colin, thank you so much for that update. Colin Flynn, EWTN News Rome correspondent. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tracy.
Well, tonight on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, a Catholic couple in Maryland has 14 children and, get this, 0 debt. And now they are releasing a new book with their tips and insight because, as they say, financial freedom is crucial for family life.
I hate when people say to me, oh, we would love to have another kid, but we're in debt. Or I wanted to go into a vocation, but I couldn't because I had debt. Or we have a son who did focused missionary work, and he could do that right out of college because he graduated debt-free.
Sam and Rob Batzinger's book, A Catholic Guide to Spending Less and Living More, will be released on April 23rd, and you can hear more tonight. Plus, an interview with Kentucky's Attorney General about an upcoming pro-life Supreme Court case. That is tonight on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly at 10 p.m. Eastern. The remains of a Catholic priest who died in a Korean War prison camp will be returned to his native Kansas. Father Emil Capon is being considered for sainthood because of his selfless service as a battlefield chaplain. After his capture in Korea on All Souls Day 1950, Father Capon continued to minister to fellow prisoners until his death. His remains were identified in March. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.